Okay, so as many of you know, Cassiopeia recently got a rework. At least that's what Rido and pretty much everybody calls it. Truth be told, it's more of a change of angle than it is a rework. What does her Q do? The same damn thing. W? Same thing. E? Same thing. R? You get the picture. Okay, so there are several subjects that I'm hoping to cover with this video. If there's anything specific that you were wanting to hear about, look on the screen for the annotation now. I'll be starting with her newly adjusted kit and the way that this will impact her overall strength and handleability, and I'm going to be dividing that section up by spells. After that, I will be talking about how she interacts with the team with the new changes, and lastly, I'll talk about the changes in playstyle. Most people aren't interested in the artwork, but if you want my take on that, I've put in a section after the credits. Alrighty, let's start with what has actually changed with this rework. First of all, Cassiopeia got a completely new passive. Before I explain how her new passive works, let's take a quick look at her old passive. Her old passive, Deadly Cadence, was a stacking buff that reduced her mana cost whenever she used a spell by 10%, capping at 5 stacks, which would reduce the cost of spells by 50%. Now, granted, this by itself is not a whole lot, but it has a lot to do with the way that her kit used to work, and in a way, the way it works now. Cassiopeia is meant to be constantly spamming her spells to harass her opponent in lane. However, her spells cost roughly the same now as they did before the changes. Now, let's compare that to her new passive, Aspect of the Server. Looking at it by itself, I thought, holy shit, that's hella OP. But then looking at the rest of the kit, I said, yeah, no. How this passive works is a stat counter that doesn't diminish and it caps at 400. Every time Cassiopeia kills a unit that is poisoned, she gains a stack. Every second during which she deals damage to an enemy champion with poison, she gains a stack. Note that this means that if she poisons 3 enemy champions at the same time for 3 seconds, she gains 3 stacks, not 9. And lastly, every time she hits an enemy with her E, Twin Fang, which I'll cover in a while, she gains a stack. At 75 stacks, she gains a % bonus to her AP that functions like a Rabadon's Death Cap. Only with 75 stacks, it's only a 5% bonus. She also starts to gain health back whenever she uses Twin Fang, which scales at 10% of her ability power. This is the only thing that really keeps her alive in lane right now, so do try to keep that in mind. At 200 stacks, the % buff to AP moves from 5% to 10%. This by itself isn't truly a significant buff, but she also gains 25% cooldown reduction. At this point, with most mastery setups that people play on a mage, she will have 30% CDR, which means she can almost permanently have her poison on any given target, provided that she doesn't miss. In her past kit, you had to build that CDR or suffer from the 5-second cooldown on Twin Fang if you weren't skilled. At 400 stacks, which is the cap, Cassiopeia gets really dumb strong. The AP bonus becomes plus 30%, which is the exact same bonus that you get from having a Rabadon's Death Cap, except of course the flat 120 AP that the item brings already. Her new passive is the entirety of what makes her a hyper carry late game mage. However, she relies very heavily on this passive, thanks to her other spells getting an AP ratio nerf. Now let's take a look at her Q. Noxious Blast was what a lot of players would use in lane for pretty much everything. It brings good harass damage and also gives wave clear, which made it overall more useful in lane than her E. They noticeably only changed one thing, and one thing only about Noxious Blast, and that is the AP ratio. It used to deal 80% of Cassiopeia's AP as magic damage over the duration, but now it only deals 35%. While I agree that the Q was just dumb strong and hard to put up with in lane, by taking away a lot of the spell's potential damage early, her laning phase was pretty much destroyed. Okay, now let's look at her W, Miasma. Honestly, I think this change was pretty minor. Not just because they took only 5% of her AP bonus damage off of the spell, but because the spell was mostly there for bush checking, slow, and reapplying poison to continue wailing on the target with Twin Fang. I'm not going to go into detail because this change was pretty unimportant, but you get the idea. We only have to look at Twin Fang now, because her ultimate was pretty much unchanged except for a minor bug fist. So, originally, Twin Fang had a 55% AP ratio. Now, that AP ratio scales with her ranks in the spell. This is the other way that Cassiopeia has become a hyper carry. Assume you have 100 AP and we aren't looking at anything except the spell itself, so magic resist is not relevant. By leveling the spell from 2nd to 3rd rank, you are increasing the base damage as you always would. However, instead of the base damage increasing, you have a buff to your AP ratio as well, which means that instead of just going up 35 damage the way it did before the change, it goes up an extra 5 damage from the 5% increase to the AP ratio. Because of this and the nerf to Noxious Blast's AP ratio, Twin Fang is now what you should be maxing without question, as opposed to maxing Q or E based on your lane. Now let's look at the new utility of Twin Fang. When it kills a unit, it refunds the mana cost in addition to 3% of Cassiopeia's total mana. Think about that for a brief moment. Most champions have, 900 to 1200 mana at maximum level? 200 to 300 at first level? The point is, last hitting with your E is mana restore instead of it just being a last hitting tool, the way it is with Annie's Q. On the old Cassiopeia, building Archangel Staff was a good idea because of her old passive. Now, it is a must-have because of the change of her passive means that you must use your spells in lane in order to scale into late game. And because of this utility, spamming a huge amount won't make you run out of mana, even with only a tier, because you can just get your mana back by last hitting with Twin Fang. Alrighty, now that we've covered her new kit, let's touch on how she interacts with the team, specifically by comparing her to other late game champions. Let's start by comparing her to Jax. Jax gets a lot of his late game power simply from his kit. Items? Pfft, just wait for late game, watch the kills roll in, and never have cash problems again. Okay, this is pretty similar to Cassiopeia, for the reason that cash isn't where she gets a lot of her power. By comparison to most champions, she gets a less of her overall ability to be relevant to the game through her items than most, because a large amount of her ability to do damage comes from having her E at max rank and stacking her passive. Next, let's compare her to Draven. Draven needs to both catch his axes and get CS to stack his passive, and then needs kills to cash in the stacks. Similarly, Cassiopeia needs CS to stack her passive. Think of her getting her damage off on enemy champions as her version of catching axes. However, she doesn't need to cash in her stacks, the stacks are simply there for her. Now let's expand the comparison a bit. What happens if a jungler comes into Jax's lane, gives the kill to Jax and taxes the lane? Jax benefits, right? What happens if the same jungler feeds a kill to Draven and Jax some CS? Draven will benefit immensely, assuming he has stacks to cash in. It will be well worth it just because he got to cash in his stacks. However, if the jungler janks for Cassiopeia, how much does she benefit, assuming she gets the kill and the jungler takes the minions? It isn't black and white the way it would usually be. The more ticks of poison the target takes, the more beneficial it is for Cassiopeia. The more minions that have poison on them that Cassiopeia gets, the more beneficial it is to her. So arguably, the most efficient use of the gank would be to give the kill to the jungler, and then let Cassiopeia have the farm, as it will be more consistently giving her stacks. Now let's discuss roams, teammates, and why you have to have a team that understands Cassiopeia's passive in order to work effectively. Suppose your top laner takes his enemy tower down and comes in to gank your lane and help you take the tower, with the understanding that afterwards the two of you are going to take dragon with your jungler. Assuming the gank is successful, and you aren't against an AP Cho'Gath who just casually eats the ganker, the next thing that happens is the two of you push the lane to take the tower. The problem here is that you aren't going to get CS. You will likely be lucky to get 2 to 3 of the minions in 2 waves if your top laner is there, especially if they are AD, and even more so if they just built Hydra or have good pushing power in their kit, like Lee Sin or Darius. Let's elaborate on this. If you roam and successfully pop an enemy summoner spell or 2, or even manage to kill the enemy laners, you are not getting what you need as a champion. You're feeding your team, and while your team needs you to do that, Cassiopeia just fucking needs those stacks. So if you gank Blitzcrank and Tristana, kill Blitzcrank and take Tristana's heal and flash, you should be focusing on letting your Lucian and Braum get the kill, and just keep poison on the enemies as long as possible. Assuming the kill is secured, your bot laners should allow you to take a few minions. Don't be greedy, your team needs farm too, but by roaming you may have hurt yourself by reducing the time you had to stack your passive, which hurts a lot. Try to take 2 or 3 minions, and if your teammates understand Cassiopeia, they will let you take those minions. Now for the last major subject of this rework, her new playstyle. The old Cassiopeia was a huge lane bully, a pusher, and a teamfight nightmare, but now she is a very defensive laner who is forced to poison her enemy laner, spam her spells to farm her passive, and has to play like a little bitch until she has 200 or so passive stacks and a max level Q and E. The new goal of Cassiopeia isn't to deny farm, but to get farm quickly and without hurting her allies too much. You need to be poking with your E and Q to stack your passive, Q and W minions so killing them will grant you stacks, and you need to be even more careful than before about only using Twin Fang on enemies that are poisoned. You're going to be hurting a lot until you have at least 75 passive stacks and 100 or so AP to make you able to survive in lane. And if you don't get tier, that will hurt you so much. It will hurt like hell. I hope this video didn't seem too ranty, because I was very frustrated for at least the first 5 or 6 games with this rework, because the playstyle is just so different and her laning phase isn't anywhere near what it used to be. I'd like to give a shout out to 2 of my floor mates, Kevin, aka Poultrygeist, and Joseph, aka Hornplayer94, for helping me with some of this guide. I hope this guide helps you guys understand the quote-unquote rework, even though technically it didn't do much to her spells. Her passive was easily the biggest change. I'm HeadinPants, and that's it. Rest in peace and pieces of pepperoni, old Cassiopeia. Stay beautiful, don't set fire to anything that I wouldn't, and you'll hear from me next time. For those who wanted to know my opinion on the artwork, I would have to say that the old splash art from right before the changes was better, because it demonstrated her mystical might, whereas the new splash art looks like she's more of a physical champion because of the breaking pillars. And it doesn't fit her personality either. Cassiopeia is a seductress if you think about her character's inspirations, like Medusa and Sirens. The in-game character model is definitely better though, as it's better defined and it really brings the snake out more from the old more than the old model. In addition, the indicator that Riot stuck on her Q, it's really helpful for landing that or avoiding it landing on you if you're playing against Cass. Anyway, if you stuck around this long, well then, damn, I guess I'm loved. I couldn't have made it this far in life without you guys. I got a lot of my courage from you guys, so by sticking to this channel and communicating with you guys, I've grown up quite a bit as a person. You guys make life so much easier on bad days. So once again, stay beautiful, don't set fire to anything that I wouldn't, and you'll hear from me next time. Peace out.